Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to Todd's podcast. We've got a pretty exciting episode for you today. We've got a 2-for-1, generally speaking, again. One of our guests, our first guest, will be Congressman Scott Franklin. He serves the citizens of the Florida 18th Congressional District. He's a 20-year veteran in the insurance and risk management business, having led Lanier Upshaw and Lakeland as president and CEO for 20 years. And they merged into BKS Partners in January of 2020, where he served as a manager. And I tell you that just because that'll be part of what we talk about in the episode. Scott's first career was a naval aviator, where he flew Viking S-3 anti-submarine jets from the decks of 13 different aircraft carriers during 26 years of service, 14 of which were active duty, and it was followed by 12 years in the reserves. And he had numerous deployments to the Mediterranean, Persian Gulf, North Atlantic, and saw some combat operations in the Gulf, in Bosnia and Kosovo. He was recalled to active duty twice after 9/11 with the U.S. Central Command. Scott is a 1986 graduate of the United States Naval Academy and holds an MBA from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. The congressman is also a graduate of Air Command and Staff College and Wharton's Executive Leadership Development Program. He and his wife, Amy, have been married for over 30 years and have 3 adult children. Our other guest today is a high school friend of mine, classmate, and it is Major General H.D. Jake Polumbo. He's retired from the United States Air Force as a 2-star general. He's a founding partner and consultant for Two Blue Aces, which is a leadership company that specializes in strategic reviews, business plan development, leadership training, and mentoring. After 34 years, Jake retired from the United States Air Force as the commander of the 9th Air Force, headquartered in South Carolina. He's also served as task force commander in Afghanistan in 2012. He was a decorated command pilot, logged over 3,000 flying hours on all models of the F-16. He holds a distinction as the first and only U.S. Air Force general officer to fly the U-2S in combat. Jake is the co-author of Leadership from 30,000 Feet with his brother Rob Polumbo, fellow generals Richard Beef Haddad, Tom Jones, and Tom's brother James. And he recently co-authored a book, Leadership from 100 Feet, with his brother Rob, General Larry Martin, and General Chad Franks. These are all retired 2-star generals, both excellent books and easy reads. I would suggest you get them both. All right, so here we are. We've got Congressman Scott Franklin calling in, and we've got General Jake Polumbo, who's in the studio with us. So thank you guys for taking some time out this morning to talk about some topics that are in the news. That's why I wanted to get both of y'all on. Some of the stuff is really kind of in the news right now. Some of it has been in the news for a while, but I'd really like to get y'all's perspective on this. And so, Congressman, thank you for squeezing us in, and thank you, General, as well.
Thanks, Todd. Good to be with you.
Yeah, good morning, Todd. And Eli, it's always good to see you, bud.
Yep, glad we got Eli up early this morning.
The brains of the operation. That's right. Eli is here and ready.
Not quite 4 in the morning, but...
It's not quite 4 in the morning, but it seems like it. One of the things I want to ask right off the bat, just kind of the general tenor in D.C., and this is for you, Congressman. Are statesmanship and civility dead in D.C., or is it on life support? It just seems like there's so much vitriol. I mean, is that just what you see on the news, or do you guys really get along much better, you know, in the hallways, or, hey, you go grab someone, hey, let's go have lunch and talk it out? It just seems like the news seems to push everyone against each other instead of pulling everyone with each other.
Well, my only frame of reference is what I know firsthand since I've been there. You know, from talking to people who were there for a long time, things have changed. It's a much more bitter atmosphere than it was before. But a lot of that is driven as a response to what the media seems to be demanding. And I would tell you, kind of behind the scenes, off the cameras, when the cameras aren't rolling, there's a lot more civility than people would believe back home. You know, as far as meeting for lunch and hashing out ideas, You really don't see that very often, and again, it's because of the eyes and ears of the media. I belong to some groups that are bipartisan, where we meet to discuss ideas, and those are all non-attributable, off the record, and we all kind of acknowledge that once we go out in the hallways, it's kind of a different deal.
But Jake, I'm sure you kind of saw that. I know in the times you've touched politics and the times I've touched it is, you can argue in public, but in private, if you're still working behind the scenes and trying to solve problems, that's really what you're sent there to do.
Yeah, and that's what I think the real responsible representatives and senators are doing, and most of them are. I would just say that I was up in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago with the Winter Haven delegation, and they met with both Congressman Franklin, who's on the show with us today, but also with Congressman Soto, and both of them were absolutely as gracious and kind and cordial as they could be, and they come from the other side of the aisle. So for me, it's people like Darren and Scott who are really the people we admire in our government, and then some who just want to get on TV and make salacious comments. I don't necessarily listen to too much of their opinion. It's Scott and Congressman Soto's opinion that I matter most.
Yeah, Todd, if I could just add a little bit more to that. Darren Soto, it's a great example. We're adjacent members. He's in the district right next to me. He used to represent part of Polk County. Yep. But he and I get along great, especially on issues that are impacting Florida. And within our Florida delegation, there are certainly issues where we're never going to agree, and we fight bitterly on those, and that's just, political ideology there. But when it comes to things that impact Florida, quite frequently we're all on the same page.
But I agree with what you just said, Jake, and what Scott was talking about. Congressman Soto, he was always the first one to call when I was a county commissioner. If we had an issue down here, hey, what do you need? What can the federal government do? He was always very receptive to us when we were having issues, when we would go to lobby for certain things. He was a fantastic congressman for his constituents. And in all honesty, there is not one congressman or senator that only has D's or R's in their district. They all have both and others, and it's their job to try and find a way to thread the needle and represent everyone. So,
Todd, on that last note, it might be the new norm. It just might be the new norm in politics. And what I think is most important is probably the young people of the country, people in their 30s that truly have a business to run, have work to do, have things they need done, their family have needs, and I think they expect their elected representatives to work for them, but also to see the better good, the higher cause and higher calling that they have as men and women in Washington, D.C. So I think it's the new norm, though. I don't think you're going to see go back to the times earlier when you have people going to lunch together in Washington, D.C. That just ain't happening anymore.
Well, I think until the public demands something different, a lot of people they want to blame Congress, and I get that. That's easy, and I'll take those arrows. That's fine. But the reality is the politics is just a reflection of what the American public is sending to D.C. And if they want to see something different, then they ought to demand civility and punish those who don't abide by it.
Yeah. I do believe that it's a phase, just like most things, and I think at some point we will start clawing our way out. It may need to have that public demand that you're talking about, Congressman, is, hey, not you, but just Congress in general or public officials in general, start acting with a little more dignity and class and statesmanship. But it sure seems like there's no one really coming on TV right now very much that is talking like that. So
I will say one thing, and Congressman Franklin and I have talked about this for a couple of years now, but I do think that Congress needs to do its job and do it on time. And again, the budget process is a reflection of the rancor and the political divide in Washington, and the fact that we can't get a budget put out on time, regardless of how many people are happy or unhappy, is a reflection of the institution not working as well as it should. And that's what I think the public needs to demand.
Right.
Congress needs to do its job on time and quit threatening us, Americans, with government shutdowns and all these other things, because that dog can't hunt. That's not what Americans want. We want a country that runs normally, and I think that might be one of the ways that it adjusts, is they've got to do their job and do it on time. And Scott, that's not meant to say at you, it's just meant to say the institution.
Oh, I completely agree. And that's why after my first term in Congress, I decided I wanted to be a part of the appropriations process, because that is where the budget happens. It's where it gets put together and executed. And unfortunately, Congress hasn't done a budget on time in nearly 30 years. And there are a lot of reasons for that. It's not as simple as there's just not a will to do it. It's just a pretty complicated process, and the politics have gotten in the way. But I agree, and we cannot keep continuing to fund the government on resolutions that just extend the previous year's spending. I think the two biggest things we could do, well, the biggest, hands down, would be a balanced budget amendment. And if we had to do that, and we had to pass a balanced budget every year, we wouldn't have the ability to kick the can down the road. So,
is there the will to do that right now?
Politically, it would require, something like that requires a lot of groundswell from the broader public.
Yeah.
I've signed on to legislation every year. We introduce bills, but they don't go anywhere because it's just it's easier to keep doing things the way they're done.
All right. Well, so let's move on from there. You both were pilots in your previous life. You flew the S-3 Viking anti-subjet off of the decks of aircraft carriers. Jake flew F-16s, and you two and some other planes. With all that you see in the press right now, is it safe to fly in the U.S.? You see all the problems in Newark. Are these FAA problems real? Are they overhyped by the media? I mean, you guys fly every day or every other day or once a week, it seems. Do you like clench your jaw a little bit when you fly into certain areas, or do you still feel comfortable being in the air?
Jake, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I will, if you'll permit me, and I will say it's still safe to fly, Todd. I fly many times, 2, 3, 4 times a week, sometimes on my own where I'm flying, but also on the airlines and everything. It's safe to fly, but I got to tell you, the system is brittle. And when you have a system that has a very low margin of a very small ability to handle any turbulence, whether it's in the air or on the ground, otherwise a major system shutdown or system delays start happening. That's where the system, the brittleness of the system has to be fixed. And I think Congress understands that. Scott will be the one to answer that, not me. But I will tell you, for the general populace, there are many of them who are going to say, no, I don't think it's safe to fly.
Right.
So as soon as the citizens of America, United States, start to think that it's not that safe to fly, then Houston, you got a problem. And that's why I say it needs improvements. We need equipment upgrades. We need to have better scheduling processes put in both airports that are trying to service huge volumes of airliners and traffic and travelers. But also our air traffic system has to be revised. And I was just in the FAA 2 weeks ago on that visit to D.C., and the FAA, I believe, has a charge to be part of the solution. But in some ways, they need the political impetus from Congress, from the president, to say, we got to fix this, we got to strap it on as a nation, and we got to make the improvements and pay for them too in a budget that's reliable each year. So it's still safe to fly. I do it every day when I can, but you got a lot of things you got to adjust and handle every day, whether it's the weather or the traffic or the volume.
Congressman?
Well, I completely agree. I think our flying is safe. It's still far and away the safest mode of transportation. It's even safer than being a pedestrian, quite honestly. With the mid-air collision in D.C. a couple of months ago, that was the first major airline incident in the United States, or crash at least, that took lives in over 20 years. And when you look at that, the literally hundreds of millions of flight miles and passengers who've flown safely, that's an outlier. But we do have a lot of issues within the FAA. The technology is antiquated. There's much better capability out there now if we just simply fund it and get it in place. And to me, this is one of those issues that shouldn't be political at all. It's bipartisan. Everybody flies. Everybody wants to be safe doing it. So we just need to get it done.
Do you think it will get done? I mean, you say everybody flies. It should be a nonpartisan. Are both sides saying, "Hey, Secretary Duffy, you've got the funds, fix this thing"?
I do, and I've heard Secretary Duffy speak about it. The challenge with every agency, and really you could insert any agency name in this. Every one of our government bureaucracies moves too slowly, and we just got to move quicker than that. So it's just a matter of cutting through the red tape and getting it done.
Eli, let's let Jennifer know that, since Jennifer is our marketing director, and she was really waiting to hear the outcome of our conversation today because she's got some flights coming up, and she was a little nervous about it. So if we could let Jennifer know that she's probably safe heading to wherever she's going.
Well, Todd, the most dangerous part by far of any trip she's going to be taking is getting back and forth to the airport on I-4.
Todd, Sandra and I are going into the system here on Friday to go international travel via planes, trains, automobiles, multiple airlines. And what I think is also part of the problem is the airlines aren't really communicating with their travel public, with us, the travelers, accurately, because at the end of the day, you've got all these apps, you've got all these things that tell you your flight is on time, your flight is on time, your flight is on time, until you are at the gate and it's late, and then they tell you it's late, and now you've been at the airport for 3 hours and you're not going anywhere. The airlines have got to do a better job of communicating with us about what volume they're trying to handle, and when they have a problem, and they don't need to make the American public sit on airplanes, sit on ramps, and do things that don't make sense. There's a lot of blame to go around, and it's not just with the government, it's also with private industry.
Todd's podcast is sponsored in part by Saunders Real Estate, your trusted partner in land and commercial real estate since 1996. With over 125 expert advisors located throughout the Southeast United States, the full-service brokerage specializes in a wide range of property types, from farms and ranches to commercial buildings and development land. If you're looking to build your legacy with a confident investment, please visit SaundersRealEstate.com or call 877-518-5263 to connect with an advisor today. So another story that's in the news recently, there were 2 or 3 F-18 Super Hornet fighter jets costing $60 to $70 million each, depending on which report you hear and I guess how they're outfitted, that were lost in 10 days from the same carrier, the USS Harry Truman. One, it said, just fell overboard. The other was a failed landing and arrestment of the plane. The pilots had to eject. The plane was lost. Luckily, the pilots were saved. I think I read minimal injuries or, minor injuries, whatever. What is going on? Is that just particular to that ship? Is that a command problem? What's happening? What have y'all heard about that? Congressman, you've flown off the ships before.
I have, and not the Truman. The Truman was just coming online as I was leaving active duty, but I flew on pretty much everything up until the Truman. Over the years that I flew, you would occasionally get deployments that were just seemed to be cursed deployments, and things happen that could just be random, attributed to randomness. But it certainly looks like there's been a pattern with this Truman deployment, because it's been horrible.
Jake, have you ever flown off of have you ever piloted off of an aircraft carrier? I know you've landed on 1 or 2.
I have, Todd. I have flown off the Eisenhower in an F-18. So we were underway. The Eisenhower was underway in combat operations in the Gulf of Oman when I was out there at the invitation of the skipper, Admiral Kurt Tidd. And it was phenomenal. It was a bucket list item for me in my flying career, was to fly with the United States Navy on a aircraft carrier, the Eisenhower. But here's what I'll say to you about losing those F-18s. It's really attributed in some ways to the asymmetric warfare that's going on right now in the world, that has to do with drones, and that has to do with different kinds of cheap weapons that can be fired at the United States of America and cause us to adjust. And that's what one of the accidents was, a simple adjustment to turn away from a incoming drone or weapon that had to be honored, even though it probably cost $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. Nothing in today's weapons cost. So combat operations is inherently a dangerous undertaking for the Navy, for the Air Force, the Marines, the Army, and we never need to forget about that. The United States Navy makes carrier operations look easy until these kind of things happen, these kind of events happen, and then you realize it's anything but easy. If it was easy, everybody could do it, and everybody can't do it like we do. So I think we've made some significant mistakes, and the skippers of those carriers have been relieved of command as they should have been. But our men and women who do carry ops day and night all around the world should be admired for the real impressive professionalism they show every day. And so we'll get it fixed. The Truman will get its act together, and they'll be doing better tomorrow.
Congressman, you want to finish?
Yeah, well, and as Jake had talked about, just when everything's working well, it's a very well choreographed ballet. We used to say during the Cold War, we could have handed the Soviets a carrier battle group, and it would have taken them at least a decade to figure out how to use it. It's one of those things I really wish every American could see. I obviously have a Navy bias, but I think a carrier underway at sea conducting flight operations is one of the most fascinating and just beautiful things you could ever observe. Yeah, just as far as the cruise goes, sometimes you do have these cruises where there just seem to be a string of unfortunate events. But after a while, you do start to think, is there some underlying theme that's creating that pattern? But it started early in their cruise when they had the Gettysburg shoot down a Hornet that had just launched. From everything I've read on that one, that just turns out to be the cruiser error. In fact, the commanding officer transferred shortly thereafter, and there's speculation as to whether he was relieved or not. Then, in February, the Truman had a at-sea collision with a merchant ship off the coast of Egypt, I guess, and the commanding officer was relieved then. As far as these F-18s, the most recent ones, the first one, as General Polumbo had talked about in response to the Houthis, that was in response to a hard turn that the ship put in to try to avoid an inbound missile. And I would say that's not the first time that sort of thing's ever happened. In a separate event back in, 1990, when I was on the forestall, we lost an S-3 over the side of the ship with a similar thing when we were working in what they called emissions control recoveries with no radar and no radio communications. Basically, the ship was operating dark, and suddenly a freighter appeared off the bow at close quarters, and the captain took the helm and put in a hard turn, and it caused an S-3 to slide overboard, and the crew had to eject. Everybody ended up being safe. But it's when you're in a combat kind of environment like the Truman is, where they're under constant threat day and night, sometimes the ship has to take evasive actions, and that's just part of what happens. In that particular case, it was a Hornet down on the hangar bay in an area by one of the elevators that doesn't have side netting or anything to catch the aircraft, and it slid overboard just due to the heel of the ship. And then, the most recent one, the one just a couple of weeks ago, the crew had touched down, and the arresting gear separated. The wire, basically the cross-deck pennant, the wire that catches the tail hook, separated. And that's really, for an aviator, that's the worst of all possible scenarios. Every time we touch down, we go to full power just in case the hook skips the wires so that you can go ahead and get airborne again. But in the case of this, the hook catches the wire, it starts to slow the airplane down, then the wire separates. And so you've basically slowed it down enough that it can't get airborne again, but it doesn't allow it to stop.
Right.
So there's nothing you can do in a situation like that but eject. And thankfully, the crew both survived that one. So, every one of these things is a different situation, but it does start to point to either training or maintenance issues, things that have gone on. Thankfully, it looks like in this case, none of the mishaps involving the aircraft involved anything that were pilot error, which, the good and the bad of that is, it looks like it's not a pilot training issue, but it is an environment that requires absolute and total trust in one another. And that's the sort of thing that can start to really weigh on the minds of pilots who are thinking, you put your faith in everyone there, but you can't there's no room for doubt and hesitancy to second guess whether your shipmates are doing the right thing. So they've got to get this fixed. That's why we train so intensely during our turnaround cycles. It's the old, train like you fight, fight like you train. And at times we have accidents and lose aircraft during training cycles, and people question that. Why are you pushing yourself out there to those extremes when we're not at war? Well, if we're going to be able to perform that under combat conditions, we've got to be able to try to simulate that as much as we can during our turnaround cycles.
Yeah, Todd, I would offer that on my first couple of approaches to the Eisenhower in an F-18, and granted, I was in the back seat and the front seater was doing the landing, but I had full confidence that the wire was going to work, that the personnel on the top of the aircraft carrier were going to be where they were supposed to be, and that we, and especially the pilot in front of me, knew what he was doing. And it worked like a dream. It was amazing, and that's why I say we should always admire the men and women that do this tough duty. But you and I have spoken about it, Todd. Look, high-performance teams are everywhere. They're in your world, they're in Eli's world here, and your building here. But if you've got 5,000 people, Americans, on an aircraft carrier called the Truman, they actually all need to believe they are on one team, and they have to believe that every one of their jobs is important to the overall operation of that warship. And if somebody doesn't do their job right, it can have a ripple effect that can really turn into a disaster and sometimes a fatality. So I believe that it is training, as the congressman said. It is training for the U.S. military when things go wrong and then happen again, something else happens, different, but happens. There's a training issue probably that just had something that didn't quite click. And it definitely isn't a high-performance team. And I think a lot of organizations can learn from those lessons. Keep your people focused on what their part of the task is, and then the bigger mission gets done and doesn't really have any catastrophes like we've witnessed out there on the high seas.
So all these accidents on the Truman, these are all happening in the Gulf of Aden.
Yeah.
And are these coming just from Houthi pirates and terrorists? Is that who's perpetrating these on us? And what are we doing about it? I mean, how many times do we let them fire something at us before we just to say, okay, you've been on the earth long enough, we're going to remove you?
Yeah, depending on how Eli chooses to edit this particular podcast, we'll see whether my buzzword of asymmetric warfare comes into play. But the Houthis have really learned how to adapt their ability to wage war on the United States in a way that overcomes our significant advantage and gives them some level of tactical advantage. And that's what drones do, Todd. And we've talked about that for years now. What's a drone and what does it do? Well, it can do a lot of things, but a big warship like the Truman has got to be ready to handle little drones shot by Houthis. And that's where American military might is not at risk right now. It's just definitely vulnerable. Scott already alluded to that by saying that, combat operations anywhere in the world have challenges, and getting shot at every day can really ride on your psyche. But we've got to be able to adapt, and the U.S. military, I think, is going through some reality checks, again, based on these events, but also what's going on in Ukraine and the Ukraine-Russia war.
Well, Congressman, how many attacks do we take before we retaliate, or are we retaliating and it's just never put out?
We are retaliating, and I'll tell you, this is what we're seeing today is just the latest wrinkle and what our military has had to adapt to over time. Today it's drones. During the Iran, Iraq, and the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, what we were seeing a lot of was IEDs, improvised explosive devices, roadside bombs. In Vietnam, it was guerrilla warfare tactics. An outmanned and outmatched military is always going to try to figure out how they can go after the established military, and that's what we're facing today. We're seeing drones, the evolution of drone use in warfare, just really escalating in Ukraine. We've seen it and now, obviously, with the Houthis, and it's a cheap way to attack to attack a big military. And it's why we have to figure out better responses. We can't continue to swap multi-million-dollar missiles against drones that may cost just a few $1,000s. So we've been there's no doubt the Eisenhower on its last deployment and now the Truman are at war. They are under constant combat conditions day and night. They're at general quarters very frequently, and they're having to shoot down a lot of incoming either cruise missiles or drone attacks. So, in fact, one of the other cruisers not too long ago had to employ its close-in weapon system, which is kind of a last line of defense, to shoot down an incoming cruise missile that came within a mile of the carrier. And that was only literally a few seconds away from impact. So we've got this ragtag bunch of terrorists basically out there in the desert that can hold at bay the world's greatest superpower, the greatest Navy that's ever existed. So we've got to get better at responding to that. And but I agree with you. If we're gonna walk softly and carry the big stick, we got to be able to use the stick when necessary and basically smack these guys down. Which is basically, I think that's where we are at this point now. So we are launching attacks.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, we are launching attacks into Yemen, going after them at the root of the problem.
So I think I saw that after the last attack, they also expanded the mission into Somalia, and we're taking out targets in Somalia. Mm. That was reported. You don't have to respond. That just was in several articles that I had read. So. But make no mistake, though, what we're seeing now of the Houthis is far different than the Somali pirate attacks where they were just coming aboard freighters and basically hijacking those things. This is a very sophisticated weaponry, and whether it's the Houthis there in Yemen or Hezbollah or Hamas, every one of these are funded by Iran. They're all proxies for the Iranian regime, and we're kind of in a silent war. We have been, whether we acknowledge it or not, with Iran for quite a while there in the Middle East. So they are the root of all the problems in that bad neighborhood. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about DOGE and talk about what these cuts mean for the military and what DOGE targets are of the military. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, we don't have anything specific, but you see it's in the paper. Congressman, you're dealing with this all the time, and you're getting behind the scenes information. What is that? Is there really that much waste in the military that we need to be concerned with, or is it really just a redirection of the existing funds that we need to be looking at?
Well, there's always waste in every kind of system, and I think the bigger the bureaucracy, the more you're going to have. And when you're specifically talking about the Department of Defense, that's quite arguably one of the largest bureaucracies in the entire world. So when you're spending close to $1 trillion on military every year at $900 billion, there's going to be room for improvement in there, and there is going to be waste, and that's what DOGE is trying to root out. So to the extent that we can find fraud and waste and abuse and get rid of it, I don't think that should be a problem for anybody. We should want to spend our dollars more efficiently. We already spend more on our military by a multiple. Big multiple than any other military in the world, including China. So, China just seems to be getting more bang for their buck these days as far as the amount of aircraft and ships they're turning out for the money. So I applaud the efforts. I support them. But I do have concern with some of the way that the DOGE team has been carrying things out, because as it was originally introduced to us in Congress, DOGE would be identifying problems, areas that they think we should take a deeper look at, and then Congress would come in and make those changes. It hasn't always worked out that way, and then the agencies are making changes without congressional approval. So I think that's something that we're in the process of hashing out now.
We've got a new Secretary of Defense. Do you guys think he leans a little heavy towards the Army? I mean, he served honorably in the Army. And so it seems like the reports in the press, again, the press is the bad guy. I'll make them out to be the bad guys here. Does it seem like the Army seems to be getting a little more juice right now than the other branches? Is it because the Army needs aren't as expensive as an aircraft carrier or jets? They just need more people. How are you guys seeing that in D.C.? That's a loaded question.
You want to start with that one, Jake? And
I will, and that way it'll take a little pressure off of you, Scott, because I understand what we're talking about here.
If your phone cuts out, I'll understand.
Yeah. Let's first start with Secretary Hegseth's experience and his ability to really run that big bureaucracy that Scott already talked about. I would say that he's got a significant challenge on his hand, and it's made even more difficult because he's in an internal tussle, let's call it, with the senior leadership of the Pentagon. Let's call them generals and admirals. And because he's having that internal conflict with those senior men and women in uniform, he lacks the experience of some of the more complex things he's trying to do and orchestrate and arrange and rearrange. And he's relying on people that, as you say, Todd, may have a very Army-centric mindset. So if his senior advisors are command sergeant majors, who I think absolutely are great leaders, by the way, but they are not senior generals who have operated in the Pentagon for years. If those are his senior advisors and chiefs of staff, how is he going to up his game from lacking the experience that he has in this national security apparatus? The question is, well, I don't know. The jury's still out. He's going to have to figure it out. It's his job to keep. But to really try and reform a process that you're not familiar with,
right,
the acquisition process of the United States Department of Defense, it's a huge bureaucracy. I will tell you that part of this challenge lies with the U.S. Congress, and Scott and I have spoken about this, and I'm going to come right back to this, to the predictability of the United States of America's budget. Absent predictable budget years, everything is chaos. And if you're trying to make reforms of a chaotic environment in the Department of Defense because budgets don't come out on time and weapon systems fall behind all the time, it really is a challenge that becomes a huge problem. And so I think Pete Hegseth has got his work cut out for him. He's got to find some senior generals and senior admirals that he trusts, that their advice and counsel is useful. It may not be what he wants to hear, and it likely won't be, depending on where he's going with headquarters sizes and size of your Army, size of your Navy. It may not be what he wants to hear, but if he doesn't listen to them, it's going to be chaos on steroids. So I think he's got his work cut out for him. A lot of people have been given jobs that they didn't have a lot of experience in, and I've related to you on some of my examples, but right, we won't go into them here other than to say Pete's got to trust some of the generals and admirals that are around him that are paid and also have dedicated their lives to doing the right thing for the country.
Hey, this is Captain Nate Shaka Khan from NOAA's Aircraft Operations Center. Hope you enjoyed Todd's podcast today, and thanks for listening.
What's the battle readiness of the Navy and the Air Force right now then? I mean, are we behind? And Scott, are we behind in weapon systems? Are we behind in delivery systems?
Yes, and yes, and kind of piggybacking before on the general's comments, we have an absolutely failing acquisition system in the military, and there's a lot of blame to go around. Unfortunately, it's one of those tough issues. It's like healthcare in America or insurance in Florida. There's a lot of finger pointing you could do justifiably, whether it's the Pentagon, issues within the Pentagon, the services deciding exactly what they want in a predictable fashion that industry can respond. Industry, there's a lot of blame to go around there because they're in the business to make money, and Congress certainly isn't helping things either. So I recently read a book that's been recommended, it's been out for a while, called Freedom's Forge, that talked about how the U.S. was able to gear up for World War II. And we all know the stories of Rosie the Riveter and how we were able to crank out, hundreds of thousands of aircraft and ships on a daily basis. And we just take that as like, oh, well, that's just because they did things better back in that day. That wasn't the case. We really had a military acquisition system in the 1920s and 30s that was very comparable to what we have now, at least as far as its inefficiency and getting things done. And it took some some giants of industry to come in and just rewrite the playbook to get that done. And I personally, I think that's where we are now. I think we need to throw out the rule book of how we've done acquisition. And the reason we need to is we face a growing and ever growing threat from China. And at the rate and pace we're going, we will not be able to withstand or stand up to them toe-to-toe militarily unless we can start building ships faster, building aircraft faster, and drones and everything else that's going to go with that. So we have a very capable force now, but if we are thinking seriously about gearing up for a potential conflict in the South China Sea, we're not going to get there with the systems that we have in place today.
Yeah, I agree completely with the congressman, Todd. Our pacing threat is China. And when you think about how our acquisition program needs to respond to that reality, we have a huge challenge on our hands. It's not the Houthis. It's not Hamas. It's not terrorist right now. It is a pacing threat that has capabilities in space that we don't have. It has capabilities in the region that we don't have, logistics support structures in South China Sea that we don't necessarily have enough of. So our pacing threat is China, and yet we are continually distracted by what's going on in Europe, what's going on in the drone attacks on Ukraine, and what's going on in the drone attacks on the Truman. So this is why I say that Secretary Hegseth has to think his way through, how really to keep our industrial base on track, what we ask industry to do for us as a nation and how to gear up and pay for it. And then what we do stay focused on in terms of how the military rehearses and practices and trains. We need to let the military become a high-performance team against a pacing threat. I will offer one other thing back, and again, this is why I love to talk to my friend Scott Franklin, because we do have good in-depth discussions. But a number of the service chiefs have said that they've got too much infrastructure to be able to really handle the acquisition that they need to do for advanced weapons, i.e. they need to free up some of their budget. Well, a base realignment and closure drill is really needed right now because we have far too many bases and installations in this country. And a few of them are Navy, but more of them are Army and more of them are Air Force. The Marine Corps and the Navy are pretty aligned the way they need to be able to fight and train to fight. But the Air Force and the Army need to do an installation realignment, and that reality, it can only come from Congress. It can only happen if Congress says so.
Do we need a disruptor right now? Is that what Trump is? Is he a disruptor, or is he a pseudo disruptor, someone that has to come in and break the system before someone can fix it? Because it sounds like this thing that's facing us in front of us that you talk about, Jake, that the congressman talks about, is just so massive. How do you make these institutional type changes to affect the change that y'all are talking about?
Yeah, Todd, the answer to your question is President Trump is a disruptor with all caps.
I agree.
Not a capital D, with all caps. And so is Secretary Hegseth inside the Pentagon.
So you think he was put there to be a disruptor?
Absolutely, and that's why I say. But he's got to form a circle of generals and admirals and senior executives who wear suits that he trusts, and I think that's what's going on. I read an article in the Washington Post yesterday about who he trusts and who he doesn't, who trusts him and who doesn't. And it's not the right group of people yet. It's the wrong group of people because they don't have the experience to really handle these major disruptive moves. Saying you're going to keep firing four-star generals who've served their country admirably for 35 to 40 years is kind of a disruption that you don't want. It's not, I think that retiring them with dignity is a good idea, but firing them is probably not the best thing you do. So that kind of disruption is not helpful. Now, I'm sure Congressman Franklin understands, what's going on in terms of how the president wants to really realign DOD because he gets to talk to him and I don't. But I think we've got to do this right, because it can be broken if you don't watch out.
Congressman?
Well, I totally agree. Disruption for disruption's sake doesn't accomplish anything, but I do think the American public knows it's frustrated. The public knows that change is necessary. It's up to the people that are put in charge there to make the right changes. But I think the president has set the table now, has opened people's minds to being able to a willingness to look at things differently, which I think we have to do. But a couple points on DOD specifically. I do think, Secretary Hegseth is looking at the future threat and realizing that he's battling an entrenched bureaucracy. And, after we can say the threats are what they are in the world, but it seems like year after year, the budget still comes down to about a third Navy, a third Army, a third Air Force. And really, as we start to prepare for that pacing threat of China, it's going to look different for the Army. This is not going to be the traditional European ground war type scenario. In fact, we're not going to have people inside these island chains that are going to be fighting hand to hand potentially against Chinese. So it's going to be there's going to be a need for a more robust space budget, Air Force and Navy, and the Army may not play as great a role in that, and that's hard to fight. And we see that not just from within the military, but also with Congress and budgeting, and that's part of my frustration when I see our unwillingness to let go of legacy platforms so that we can make way and make room in the budget for new platforms. My appeal in my first term to get on the Armed Services Committee to the chairman, Mike Rogers, was that other than the Avon, we do have the Avon Park training range in our district, but I don't have military bases. And I told him that. I said, look, most of the people on Armed Services Committee are there because they have major bases in their district that they're trying to represent. Yeah, and I don't have that. My goal, my whole reason for wanting to do this is because I care about the defense of the country and our military and our ability to be prepared to fight the future wars should they come. So, when the Pentagon sends over a request that says, hey, we would like to eliminate this aircraft or this platform or this ship or this base in order to spend on these other new things, and then we have politicians come in and say, well, we can't allow you to do that because that's going to cost me votes in my district. We've got interests that are misaligned there. And I know that political angle is always going to be there, but we've got to be able to rise above that because we just simply don't have the financial resources to keep funding things that shouldn't be funded.
Yeah, so to loop this back, Todd, to how you opened this part of the discussion, I think Secretary Hegseth has got to kind of try to avoid his tendency to see and go to his comfort zone, which is the United States Army. The Army is the bill payer. It has to be the bill payer for the next few years in order to get our Navy realigned for the pacing threat, and definitely in order to get our anemic Air Force back on the step and be able to handle the global missions that it has. So that TOA, terms of apportionment, that Scott talked about, one third of $900 billion is $300 billion apiece. That can't keep going on. You've got to have a better, more mature adult discussion on how does the United States avoid conflict with China. We want to avoid conflict with China by showing them we're ready for anything they got. And right now we're not ready for everything they have.
Well, if the future wars will be fought where we're not going to need the on-the-ground type army that Congressman just said, what does it look like? I mean, is it just going to be weapon system against weapon system? I mean, what will victory look like?
Well, I think it'll be a lot of initial posturing in space. There may be some events in space that happen to see whether the United States resolve is there. It could be and likely will be some kind of probing into Taiwan that says, let's see how they react. Do we get the Truman, the Eisenhower, and every other aircraft or battle group participant coming into the South China Sea if they probe Taiwan? Those kind of things are what's going to happen in the next two, maybe 3 years max. We're going to see those things. We're going to lose things in space, and we can't quite figure out how it happened, but I know where it probably came from. And that's where that resolve has got to be real steady. And as much as Pete Hegseth is a disruptor right now in the DOD, he better be listening to the people who really study this for a living every day and have the strategy and the tactics to respond.
Congressman, do you have anything on that?
No, I think that's right on. The year, 2027 has been thrown out there for years now as what the experts view as a time when China sees its ability to be at its peak vis-a-vis our readiness and preparedness. So we're in a rapid catch-up mode to try to gain at least parity or close enough to parity to dissuade China from wanting to make any aggressive moves like that. So time is of the essence, and we really can't afford, back to General's comments about budgeting, we're operating currently on a full year continuing resolution, which is an extension of the previous year's budget. That's absolutely, that's unsatisfactory. It cannot happen, and we're never going to be where we need to be if we can't get the budgeting process right. But, here it is now. We're almost into June, and we're still waiting for the president's budget to come down with specifics. So we are, when I get back to D.C. next week, we're going full throw into the appropriations process and at least trying to do what we can to get our appropriations bills out of Congress, or at least the House of Representatives.
Yeah, I think disruptors are fine in general, but there has to be a plan to come out on the other side of what that disruptor has done, especially with large institutions, because they are so hard to change once they're called institutions for a reason. And it is hard to make changes. You can shave around the edge a little bit and try and make some minor things. But at some point, errors upon errors upon errors upon years upon decades just seem to build up, and at some point someone's got to come in and try and break it. But breaking it for breaking's sake is not the right thing. Breaking it or smashing it a little bit with a plan on the other side, to me, is the appropriate way to do it. And I hope that is happening. I hope that Secretary Hegseth will put some folks around him that represent all forms of reconstituting everything, rather than just folks that tell him what he wants to hear.
Yeah, I mean, if you break it, you own it. And that's where I would say not everything is bad about the Pentagon and about the Department of Defense. I will say that the biggest thing, and I can say this, it's easier for me to say this than Congressman Franklin, but I can say this about President Trump. What you really do want to do about the United States of America right now in the circumstances that we find ourselves in is not to break, the basic tenets of our government. Make sure we don't disrupt the real basic tenets of separation of church and state, of the checks and balances between the three branches of government. There are some areas where it could go down that path in the next few months, and that would be not only a disruption, but it would be a huge distractor. So what I would say, even though DOGE looks like it's been pretty random, let the secretaries of those departments and those agencies do their job now. If they found some things that are wrong, let them fix it. Let them go through internal mechanisms to fix it. And let the government learn to function better tomorrow than it is today. And then keep, the Supreme Court and the Congress and the executive branch very cordial in the understanding that each one has a role to play. Don't disrupt the basic tenets of America. Let us, work our way through it with the what looks like a lot of chaos right now in Washington.
So, Congressman, what's the state of the VA right now? Doug Collins, Secretary of the VA, has been brought in. I don't know if he was still in Congress when you were first elected. I don't know if he had retired by then. I don't know if he ever served with them. What's the state of the VA? Is it improving? Is it still status quo?
Yeah, well, that's interesting because as Jake was just saying that, I was kind of thinking through the different subcommittees I'm involved with and the secretaries I've had a chance to meet with recently regarding DOGE and how they're planning on implementing that, whether it's Secretary Rollins with USDA, things she's working there on like SNAP and other programs. Secretary Collins I've met with talking about changes in the VA. I've met with all the military chiefs regarding changes at the Pentagon. So there's a common theme there, and DOGE is getting into all of these. And candidly, it's turning up the need across all these agencies for some very systemic change, not to break them and throw everything out, but to certainly acknowledge that they all need to improve. So the VA specifically, I've Doug Collins had left Congress before I came in,
Okay.
but I've had a chance to meet with him a few times now, and we've had some good long powwows in my office about his plans for the agency. And, there's a lot that needs to be fixed. It's a huge bureaucracy. It's the biggest agency outside of the DOD, and we spend a tremendous amount of money on it, as we should, to be making good on the promises we've made to veterans. So there's a lot of scare tactics, particularly coming from the media out there about, trying to scare people into thinking that veterans care is going to be cut. And that's the farthest thing from the truth. What the secretary is trying to do is find out reasons, find the places where there are bottlenecks in the system and veterans aren't getting the care they need, and figure out how to eliminate those. So he's got a great plan for it. As far as DOGE is concerned, the cuts that they've recommended, no one has been eliminated from the VA that has anything to do with delivery of care to patients. No doctors, no nurses, no any of the technicians that are involved in that kind of thing. It's basically the administrative staff that they've been making some cuts to. But I think it's going to end up with better care, and the secretary is committed to that. And we just had him in again for a hearing week before last, and he's on track to make those changes. And I have great confidence in him.
Great.
Definitely don't break it now, because what I have seen in my recent probes into the VA, and again, I told you, Todd, last time I was here, I went into Lakeland VA Clinic, a new facility that was built, and the staff is superb. The doctors were wonderful. The nurses and technicians were motivated. And I went, oh my God, this is not the VA of 5 years ago, when people were dying in waiting rooms, right, and they didn't even know that the patients were, that bad off. So I hope that those cuts are, potential, being looked at, but not final decisions yet. Because if you break it, you're going to go back to what it was 5 years ago, and then we're going to be wasting money significantly in the VA.
I think there is a moral imperative to take care of the war fighters and the soldiers that have fought for us and have sacrificed. And it's nice to hear the congressman talk about patient care is not being sacrificed, is not being compromised, that perhaps if DOGE comes in, those savings or whatever may be on the administrative side and the non-patient care side, which I think is important.
Well, just if I could real quick there, Doug, a couple of things, just as an example. Jake had mentioned the new facility in Lakeland. We've seen the reports where the cost of VA facilities is in some cases many times more expensive than a comparable private facility. I get it. We're talking about cruisers and fighters and things like that, but if we're talking about a healthcare clinic, there's no reason why that same building should cost the VA sometimes 3, 4, 5 times as much as it would if someone in the private sector were building that. That would be an example. We've got to be able to bring those costs into alignment with what the private sector would be able to do. And then, we also have entrenched bureaucracy with people with a system that just doesn't want to fire people who should be fired. I found I introduced a bill last time, but we had uncovered in the case of some whistleblowers that had come to us complaining of sexual harassment. As we started digging into it more deeply, we're finding that people were either being allowed to retire or transfer to other government agencies rather than be investigated and held accountable. And it's one thing to let them go. Then they're going to be on the government pension for the rest of their lives, even though they were doing things wrong while they were in uniform or in service. But in some cases, they're just transferring right over to another government agency and continuing to do the same thing. We also found there's a lot of clinical trials that are done. There's a big pot of money that goes to medical research on behalf of the VA. We found some systems, some places where there were contracts in place for years that didn't even have any patients in them. So hundreds of millions of dollars are being wasted every year. Yeah. So everybody thinks like, oh, if you're going to cut $1 from the VA, then you're obviously taking it out of patient care. No, in a lot of cases, we're taking money that's being wasted. I'm not suggesting that we need to spend less. I just think we need to get more bang for the buck, and that money needs to be directed toward patient care and not towards waste in the system. So that's what the secretary is trying to fight, and I think he's going to do a good job of it.
Excellent. Hey, everybody, this is your host, Todd Dantzler. As most of you know, I'm a partner with Saunders Real Estate and have been a very active and working broker for over 42 years. I have fostered strong relationships throughout the state of Florida, working on properties ranging from agriculture and development land to multifamily, commercial, and industrial projects. If you have any real estate needs at all, please give me a call. I'd love to help. My direct line is 863-877-2846. Thank you. How many former military are in Congress right now? Elected officials on the national level, the Senate and the House. And is there a special camaraderie that exists between y'all that you kind of, we can fight in public a little bit, but in private, we all kind of know we're all on the same team. And I know not everyone is a hawk and not everyone is a dove that's from the military that goes into elected office. Do you have an idea of how many are there?
Yeah, I haven't looked with the newest Congress coming in, but it's less than 20%. I'm thinking the number's around 16 to 18%. And that is at the absolute lowest it's been in kind of modern history. You know, there was a time probably in the 70s, early 80s, when you still had World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War vets there, that the number was as much as 80%. Over 80% of members of Congress had served in the military. And I don't think that's the magic bullet to making Congress work better, but I do think it would help. And the reason I see that and believe it is I belong to some bipartisan veterans groups, one in particular called the Four Country Caucus, that's R's and D's, and we get together and work on issues, and some of it's social, some of it's hard problems that we're trying to solve. And so and not just on military issues, it's allowed me, though, to build some relationships across the aisle that I might not have otherwise. So then we come to issues on other topics that we can work on. And I've worked on some agricultural bills and things in other committees outside of DOD that I probably wouldn't have because I wouldn't have had that relationship built.
I would also think that the military teaches team building. You're part of a team in D.C., whether you're on the right or the left or whatever. And if everyone decides to branch off and be individuals and be on TV more than solving the problems of their constituents, that's kind of an issue. And maybe that's part of the folks who fought in the wars just because there were wars to be fought and everyone was in them. I hope that those numbers will go up.
Todd, I would, you taught me something, and a few other friends who have served their county, served their city, served their country. Those who run govern, and those who don't run need to be careful how much criticism they offer. And I learned from you in that regard as I talked about how things work and politics work. But I do salute people like Scott Franklin. Congressman Franklin ran for office and was elected twice now, and he now is part of the governing process. But I guarantee, knowing Scott as I do, that he brings a team mentality and a higher calling to the office in D.C. than some others without that kind of background and experience. So I hope more of our military men and women run for office and then go to Washington and try and straighten out a little bit of the civility and decorum, because I know Scott has done a great job.
Well, I think he has, but he also wore a hat of running private businesses, private industries. And
that's a
as
big
much
deal
as we
too.
need military in there, we need people who have signed the front of a paycheck and not just endorse the back of a paycheck to understand how hard it is to make payroll sometimes and how to deal with the rules and everything that are passed down. So my hat's off to the congressman for doing
right on. Well, thanks for saying that. We really do need more people with a business background, people who have had the pressure of making payroll, making budgets, and not having anybody to blame, blame for their mistakes. You're held accountable pretty quickly in the business world if you screw up, and that doesn't seem to be the case inside the Beltway in D.C.
Right. And if you've never done anything and were somehow figured out a way to get elected to Congress or the state house or whatever, you've got no real world experience to solve problems. And I think that's a huge problem. So,
well, I also think, and I am incredibly appreciative for my chance to have served on the Lakeland City Commission because, that's where government works best, closest to the people. The farther you get away from the people, the less efficient it is and less responsive. So that was a very valuable opportunity for me, and it at least shows me, hey, government can work well.
Yep. And just like that, our friends in Tallahassee are trying to take more and more of our responsibilities and rights away from how we govern locally and take it all to Tallahassee. So
what are they thinking up there in Tallahassee, Todd? What are they thinking? They need to get their act together.
They're drinking something funky. Maybe they got an extra brand of weed or something. I don't know. Kind of wrapping things up, just a couple of quick questions, and I'll let you both go because I know General's on a hard break. In the future, we still going to need war fighters, or is everything going to be turned over to AI, autonomous pilots, autonomous robots on the battlefield? Or is it just going to be generals back at MacDill running things and machines fighting machines?
I'll go first, and I'll make it quick. We're going to have a man on the loop or a woman on the loop for a long time when you're talking about weapons and hypersonic missiles, etc. You got to have somebody that's held accountable. You can't hold an AI machine microprocessor accountable for something that went terribly wrong. So however the military chooses to do and incorporate AI, you got to have somebody you can court-martial if something goes terribly wrong.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And having served on the AI task force last Congress, I don't envision any time in the near to intermediate future where you're not going to have a human in the loop if that ever goes away. I'm not sure that will. But there's no doubt that the world is heading towards AI, and we're going to have to adapt to that. And as far as I think I may have served in probably the glory years of being a naval aviator flying off of aircraft carriers. I do think that's going to change in time. I don't know that we're going to go completely to unmanned aircraft. I do envision a time where you're going to have sort of the pilot in the aircraft is going to be the airborne quarterback controlling maybe a squadron of unmanned aircraft that are sort of assistants and proxies. And part of that's to keep the pilot out of the threat engagement zone that we're going to have as the missiles and get more effective and is pushing us farther away from the fight. But humans are definitely going to have a play in this for a long time. It's not going to be, there's no Terminator kind of scenario where everything's turned on to automatic AI.
So that was a good segue into my next question is, what does the Navy of the future look like? You just kind of told what the naval aviators of the future will look like. How about the Navy in general?
Well, you can look at the numbers of crew on Navy ships now. The new ships rolling off the line have far fewer crew on board because just so many of the tasks are automated, and it's the weapon systems are pretty strong on their own, and they can definitely make decisions. At least provide the decision maker with information a lot quicker. So you don't need 5,000 sailors on a carrier in the future, and the same in the same way you don't need squadrons of a dozen or more aircraft, all with 1.5 crew per airplane. You're going to have a lot of those aircraft that are unmanned, and the Navy's working on that now with its next generation of fighters, and also the accompanying collaborative combat aircraft, the CCA, that's being bid on now. You'll basically have an airborne pilot controlling a number of those vehicles.
Jake, how about the Air Force?
Well, it's got to all be connected. It's got to all work. Yep. It's you've got to have. When I say you got to have a man on the loop or a woman on the loop, that loop has got to be global. I've got to be make sure the Navy's talking to the Air Force, and I've got B-21 that's 2,000 miles away that's already coordinating with what the submarines are doing. The United States military is as sophisticated of a fighting force as ever in mankind, but it's got to work. So it's kind of like your network at home. If your internet goes down, you're kind of struggling with how do you get up in the morning and find coffee. Well, in the military and in the Air Force tomorrow, it's all got to connect. And AI is going to help you do that, but it's really going to be man-machine interface. And then really, truly, if the Navy and the Air Force don't talk and the Air Force and the Army won't talk, we're going to have some problems. So I think the Air Force is overcoming some of the challenges that it's had of over-promising and under-delivering at certain times on sophisticated warfare, and we're getting at it now. Scott's discussion of combat collaborative combat aircraft, i.e. missile trucks and bomb trucks, hooking up with a F-35 and then going into battle with one quarterback having about 20 missiles and 20 bombs at his or her disposal. That's got to work. I think it will, but we've got to get at it, and we can't take any bad excuses, lame excuses anymore. It's got to work.
Last question, and we'll wrap it up. Who's got the better group of pilots, Navy or Air Force?
I tell you, I wanted to get this in because Sandra and I watched a show last night on Netflix about the Thunderbirds in 2023 and how they formed a new team. And I would offer to your listeners that my comments about high-performance teams can come in all flavors, all sizes, all shapes, everywhere in industry, everywhere else. But watch that show on Netflix about the United States Air Force demonstration team coming together, and they were clunking. They were clanking pretty bad in their first 2 or 3 months of practice and coming together as a team in 2023. In fact, they had one guy, Primo was his name, and Primo just couldn't join the formation properly, and everybody was struggling with it. But when they finally got to their certification day, they came together as a high-performance team, and they just wowed them for the rest of the year, and the public loved them, kids loved them. They were all personal and outgoing. And that role model from the aviators in our great Navy, the aviators and men and women in our great Air Force, I think I won't tell you anybody's better than the other. I'll just tell you got some really good examples of some great Americans in those teams.
Congressman?
Well, there's a reason why General Polumbo is a 2-star general, and he's very tactful and diplomatic. And all I know is that there was a documentary a couple of years ago on the Blue Angels. So this one on the Thunderbirds feels like a little bit of a Me Too moment from my perspective.
It did to me too, Scott. I have to admit, I thought that one on the Blue Angels was superb. They had to come and bring it strong, so they hired some pretty good producers and directors. In fact, I saw him at the end. If you want to watch it and see who directed and executive produced it, I won't tell it here, but you'll laugh when you see it at the end. It was pretty high-powered executive producer for the Air Force Thunderbirds.
Well, I always thought, considering in the Navy, so much of our time was focused on preparing for carrier landings. We would save gas at the back end of every hop to do multiple touch and goes, all practicing for carrier landings. I thought, gosh, if nothing else, over the course of a career, an Air Force fighter pilot has had hundreds of more hours just because they haven't had to save the gas. Air Force pilot just comes in and lands. You just do one flared landing and it's over.
I don't even remember my landings most of the time. I walk away and go into the ready room, grab a beer, and go, did I land? I don't even remember it. You guys have to remember it.
Well,
yeah, mine are represented by gray hairs.
Exactly. I'm going to tell you one story that Jake said, and I'll tell you, we were landing. We had gone on an economic trip up to South Carolina, North Carolina, I think, and Jake and Sandra were a few rows ahead of me. And when we landed, it was a pretty hard landing, in my opinion, maybe not for you guys. I mean, we hit hard. And I went, holy crap, what in the world was that? And General Polumbo turns around and he just said, Navy pilot. And that was all he said.
100%.
100% Navy pilot. And we've got a friend, John Strang, who flew off carriers, and his attitude was, if you give me a parking lot, I can put a plane in it. So Jake and his buddies all have these 10,000-foot runways, and you guys had 300 feet. So I'm impressed with both of you.
No, it's all good. We're the same team, and I love the banner. It's part of what makes it fun.
Congressman, is there anything that your constituents can do for you? Is there any issues that we can talk to folks about? Is there anything that you need from us to help support you?
Oh, I love to get the feedback from people. We are doing, as we found, our most efficient way to get out to the most number of people in the district is via our telephone town halls. We We've tried the in-person only gets a few people here and there, and it's such a huge district. So we do those once a month. I would love to have as many people from the district calling in with their questions, because even if we can't get them on the air, we respond personally to everybody within 24 to 48 hours. But it gives me a real good pulse of what's on people's mind back in the district, in addition to ability for us to share what's happening in D.C. But
how do your constituents or folks find out about when they are? Go to your website, and you've got a tab on there for.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, if folks go to our website, they can request to be added to the list, because the way we do those is we have a third party that will randomly call 50,000 registered voters throughout the district. So that's just on a rolling basis, and I have no idea how they go about doing that. But anyone who would like to be called, to opt into it, if we know in advance, then we automatically call out to them. So, our website is franklin.house.gov, and there's a place to sign up. And we will also promote them a week or so out on social media too, for people to be able to sign up.
Perfect. General, anything from your end?
I would just, I did a talk on Memorial Day in Cypress Wood, and we honored and put a monument up, or dedicated a monument to John G. Wood for all of his accomplishments in the community, and also as Navy Lieutenant John G. Wood, aviator. Yeah. But one of the things I said about John Wood, and I will say about a lot of Americans, is good leaders do simple things well. Good leaders do simple things well. And one of the things we should always do is remember our fallen, as we talked about that day, but also, as you've already mentioned today, Todd, just taking care of our veterans and the men and women who've served in uniform. They really, really, they are deserving of our admiration and our thanks. So good leaders in the community, in our nation, all around the country, just be thankful for your military and your people who are serving today.
Yeah, well, thank you both for your service, for what all you've done in the military and what you've done on the private side, and now what you're doing in Congress. Scott, I appreciate it very much. I do want to give a quick shout out to the 22 Project. Jake's brother, Rob, is on their board. Alex is running the show with his wife, and they have done remarkable things. It's the 22 Project. I would take a look at it if you feel compelled. They're always looking for money. And I'm trying to get Alex on the podcast here, and maybe Mumbles will come on with him, and we can talk and discuss what he's been doing and what his organization's been doing for our veterans as well. So
yeah, it's a worthy cause, and it really has great results for our war fighters who have taken some real battlefield injuries.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Congressman, thank you very much for your time. You've been very generous. Sorry about the connection issues. I'm glad we finally got it figured out. That's why Eli gets the big bucks and the 2 jars of jelly this month for the Jelly of the Month Club. Thank you for your service, and be safe.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Todd. Bye.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. I want to thank you for listening to Todd's podcast. This has been your host, Todd Dantzler. If you enjoyed this episode, tune in next time when we'll be talking to Ronnie Ocean, also known as Ron O'Connor. Ron is a recent inductee into the Polk County Sports Hall of Fame. We'll be talking sports. We'll be talking some fun anecdotal stories about his life in sports and who all he's interviewed. So please tune in next time. It'll be a fun hour to spend. As always, don't forget to rate, review, follow, and subscribe to Todd's podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions for me or any suggestions for future guests, please call or text our number at 863-288-0944 or visit todddantzler.com. Again, that's 863-288-0944, or visit my website, todddantzler.com. I look forward to hearing your questions and feedback, and please take care.